They say you can't take it with you, but my husband Richard certainly tried. He took my youth, my money, and my voice, and when he finally died, he tried to take my house too. He just sent our children to do the dirty work. This is the story of how a 72-year-old widow, a ghost in her own home, discovered a secret worth $200 million in her attic and used it to burn down the world of the people who tried to bury her. It's a story about quiet cruelties and loud revenge. So if you believe a woman's power only grows with age, make sure you follow my channel, like this video, and hit that notification bell, because you won't want to miss a single moment of how this house of lies came crashing down. My husband Richard had been a man of quiet, meticulous cruelties. His funeral, held in our sprawling craftsman home in the Laurelhurst neighborhood of Portland, felt like his final, perfectly staged performance of a life built on my silence. We are in the year 2025, and grief has become just another form of content, a commodity, to be curated, filtered, and posted for public consumption. My daughter Chloe was the director of this miserable spectacle. She had orchestrated every detail for the benefit of her thousands of Instagram followers, from the artisanal charcuterie boards, overflowing with prosciutto and fig jam, to the somber-faced selfies she took with her husband Mark, their heads angled just so to catch the mournful light filtering through the stained glass windows. I stood by the large bay window in the living room, a place where I'd spent decades watching the world go by, feeling like a ghost in my own home. My black dress was simple, old, comfortable. It felt honest. Chloe's was a sheath of black designer fabric that clung to her like a second skin, a garment that likely cost more than my entire monthly Social Security check. I watched them work the room. They weren't mourning a father and a father-in-law. They were networking. They were leveraging a corpse, Mark, a real estate developer, whose ambition always seemed to run 5 laps ahead of his actual success, moved through the crowd with a predatory grace. He clapped men on the back, his voice a low, confident hum that carried across the room. I could catch snippets of it, a smooth blend of condolence and commerce. Tragic, just tragic. Richard was one of a kind. He'd say, his hand lingering on a shoulder. By the way, did you see the numbers on that new downtown development? The city council is finally coming to their senses. He was selling, always selling. His own future, his brand, the very air in the room. Chloe was his counterpart, a queen surveying her court. She held a wine glass, not like a mourner, but like a scepter, her movements fluid and practiced. She'd drift from one small group to another, offering a sad, beautiful smile that never quite reached her eyes. She'd touch an arm, whisper something that sounded profound, and then her eyes would dart around the room, checking angles, ensuring the performance was running smoothly. She caught my eye from across the living room. For a fraction of a second, her smile tightened the muscles around her mouth, tensing in a familiar flicker of irritation. It was the look she gave me when I'd forgotten to turn on the porch light, or when I'd asked a question she deemed inconvenient. It was a look that said, "You are a problem to be managed." Then, just as quickly, the mask of the grieving daughter snapped back into place. The guests, most of them strangers to me, friends of Chloe and Mark, offered their condolences like transactions. They'd approach me, their faces arranged in masks of sorrow, and deliver lines that felt scripted. "He was a great man." One woman in a ridiculously large hat whispered, pressing a cold, dry hand into mine. I didn't know her. Had Richard, I couldn't be sure. "You must be devastated," said another, a man with a scent of expensive cologne that filled my lungs and made me want to cough. I just nodded. I played my part. I was the set dressing the essential prop. The grieving widow. My authentic sorrow, or lack thereof, wasn't the point. My performance was necessary only to legitimize theirs. I turned back to the window, watching the Oregon rain begin to fall, smearing the view of the manicured lawn. I wasn't grieving the man Richard was. I was grieving the woman I might have become without him. I remembered a day 30 years ago, standing in this exact spot. I'd just bought a small, beautiful watercolor painting from a local artist. It depicted the Oregon coast, a place I loved, a swirl of blues and greys that felt like my own soul. I had used my own small savings money I had painstakingly put aside from the household budget. When I showed it to Richard, he hadn't yelled. He never yelled. He just looked at it then at me and said, "It's a bit sentimental, don't you think, a little cheap?" He hadn't forbidden me from hanging it. He just made it clear that my taste, my joy, was a source of disappointment to him. The painting ended up in a closet. That was his brand of cruelty. Not a fist, but a slow, constant erosion of the self. 1,000 tiny cuts that left you bleeding internally, with no visible wounds to show for it. The funeral was just the grand finale of that lifelong performance of his own importance and my insignificance. Finally, the last car pulled away from the curb. The front door clicked shut, and the sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. The silence that descended wasn't peaceful. It was heavier than the grief, thicker than the cloying scent of the wilting funeral lilies. It was a weighted blanket of quiet pressing down on me. The house which Richard and I had built nearly 50 years ago suddenly felt cavernous and alien, a museum of a life I wasn't sure I had actually lived. Every floorboard seemed to creak with the memory of unspoken words. Every shadow in the corner held a quiet compromise. I walked through the rooms, my hand trailing along the walls. This house was the only thing that was truly mine, and even that was a complicated truth. It was my name on the deed, my inheritance from my parents, that had paid for this prime piece of Laurelhurst land all those years ago. It was a fact that Richard had resented for every single day of our marriage. He never said it outright, of course. His methods were more insidious. He controlled me not with fists, but with withering disappointment and a slow, suffocating financial strangulation. "Are you sure you need that, Eleanor?" He would ask, his voice calm, reasonable, whenever I wanted to buy something for myself. He held the purse strings so tightly that I eventually stopped asking. It was easier to go without than to endure the quiet shame he dished out, the implication that I was frivolous, irresponsible, a child who couldn't be trusted with money. My money. I paused in the dining room, my fingers tracing the edge of the large mahogany table. This was where he had once slammed his fist down, not in a rage, but with a single sharp, controlled crack that split one of my mother's heirloom dinner plates in two. My crime. The pot roast had been dry. He didn't apologize. He just looked at the broken porcelain, and then at me, his eyes cold with disappointment, and I was the one who felt the need to apologize. The only real, untainted connection I had left in this world was with my grandson, Leo. While Chloe and Mark had bustled about after the funeral, taking care of things, which mostly meant packing up the expensive leftover wine, Leo had stayed behind. He was a lanky 17-year-old, all sharp angles and quiet observation. He had his grandfather's intelligent eyes, but none of his coldness. There was a warmth in Leo, a gentle empathy that felt like a balm on my raw nerves. He found me in the study, Richard's domain, a room panelled in dark wood and smelling of old paper and leather. I was just standing there, lost in the suffocating silence. "Are you okay, Grandma?" he asked, his voice soft, breaking the spell. He was holding his phone, the screen glowing in the dim light. He hesitated, then turned it toward me. "You should probably see this." On the screen was Chloe's Instagram feed. A professionally filtered photo of her head resting on Mark's shoulder, a single perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek. The caption was a masterclass in performative grief. "Family first, Sad day, legacy, honoring dad. Below it, another photo of the charcuterie board artistically arranged. Life is for celebrating, even in the hard times. It was grotesque. It was a violation. They had turned our family's loss into an aesthetic. Leo watched my face, his expression unreadable. Then he scoffed a short, sharp sound of pure disdain. "They're vultures, you know," he said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. "They've been talking about the potential of this house for years. Dad thinks it's his ticket to the big leagues." I just nodded my throat too tight to speak. I was too tired to argue, too broken to agree out loud. But his words were like a key turning in a lock I didn't even know was there. For 50 years, I had believed that I was the problem, that I was too sensitive, too emotional, that my perceptions were flawed. Richard had convinced me of it, and Chloe had continued his work. But hearing my deepest, most shameful thoughts, spoken aloud by this boy, this kind, perceptive boy, it planted a seed of validation in the barren, salted soil of my spirit. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't wrong. They were vultures. The quiet of the house had a full week to fester. Each day the silence grew deeper, more profound. It was no longer just an absence of sound. It was a presence. I'd wander from room to room, the echo of Leo's words, vultures, following me. For the first time, I looked at the house, not as a prison built by Richard's resentment, but as a fortress. My fortress. The only ground I had ever truly owned. The validation Leo had given me was taking root, a tiny, fragile sprout of defiance, pushing its way up through a lifetime of compacted submission. Then they came. Chloe had texted her message, oozing a cloying, artificial sweetness. "Mum, Mark and I need to pop by, just to check on you and discuss a few things, to make sure you're supported. XO." Supported? The word felt like a threat. They sat me down at my own dining table, the one stained with the memory of Richard's quiet rage. They sat opposite me, a united front of concern. Chloe reached across the table and patted my hand. Her skin was cool, her touch fleeting. It felt like handling a museum artifact. "Mom." She began, her voice a slick, polished veneer of practiced sympathy. It was her public speaking voice, the one she used for her online brand partnerships. "We've been so worried about you. We know how much you loved Dad, and now, well, this big old house. It's just too much for one person to handle." I said nothing. I just watched her, this daughter who was a stranger to me, her face a carefully constructed mask of love. Mark, ever the pragmatist, saw his opening. He slid a glossy trifold brochure across the polished wood of the table. The paper was thick and expensive. The name on the front was printed in a gentle, looping font, Willow Creek Senior Living. Below it, a tagline, "Your next chapter in carefree comfort." "It's top of the line, Eleanor." Mark said, his voice smooth as silk. "5-star dining social activities, 24-hour nursing staff. Think of it as a permanent cruise ship. All your needs taken care of. No more worrying about leaky roofs or property taxes." The air left my lungs in a silent rush. It felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The brochure depicted smiling, silver-haired seniors playing shuffleboard and laughing over glasses of iced tea. The rooms were small, sterile, and identical, furnished with inoffensive beige furniture. It was a waiting room for death, packaged as a luxury resort. They weren't suggesting. They were informing. This was not a conversation. It was a verdict. My voice was a whisper, barely audible in the heavy silence. "And the house," Mark smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the grin of a predator that has cornered its prey and knows the hunt is over. "We'll handle everything," he said, leaning forward, his enthusiasm palpable. "The market in Laurelhurst is white hot right now. We can get it listed staged and on the market within a month. With the equity you're sitting on? Eleanor, this house is a gold mine. The sale will generate more than enough capital to cover your expenses at Willow Creek indefinitely. It's the smart play. It's the only play. They had it all figured out. My life, my home, my future, all neatly packaged and sold to the highest bidder. This house, these walls that had absorbed 50 years of my life, the good, the bad, the silent suffering. It was just an asset to them, a commission, a stepping stone for Mark's faltering career, a source of fresh capital for Chloe's expensive tastes. Something inside me, that tiny sprout of defiance, hardened into steel. I looked from Mark's eager, hungry face to Chloe's impatient, perfectly made-up one. I thought of the watercolor painting hidden in the closet. I thought of the broken plate. I thought of 50 years of being made to feel small. I pulled my hand back from Chloe's. I looked directly at Mark and then at my daughter. No, the word was quiet, but it landed in the center of the room like a stone shattering the fragile illusion of their concern. The change was instantaneous. The air crackled with tension. Mark's smile vanished, replaced by a look of disbelief, then annoyance. Chloe's mask of sympathy didn't just slip, it shattered. Her face, for the first time all week, looked genuinely emotional. It was flushed with pure, unadulterated anger. No, she repeated, her voice sharp, stripped of all its practiced softness. What do you mean, no, Mum, be reasonable? I mean, no. I said, my own voice stronger now. This is my house. I'm not leaving. Chloe threw her hands up in exasperation. The mask was completely gone now, revealing the ugly, grasping entitlement underneath. Don't be selfish, Mother, she snapped, her voice rising. You're 72 years old. What on earth do you need all this space for? It's a waste. Mark and I have a future to build. We have needs. This house is a burden on you and an opportunity for us. It's a win-win. A burden on me. An opportunity for them. The truth was finally laid bare. It was never about my welfare, my comfort, or my grief. It was an eviction notice wrapped in a cheap, transparent lie of love. They saw me not as their mother, but as an obstacle. An old woman squatting on their inheritance. I sat there, in the wreckage of their failed ambush, the glossy brochure for Willow Creek, lying on the table between us, like a declaration of war. They eventually left, cloaking themselves in righteous indignation, leaving a trail of angry, wounded silence behind them. I was alone again in my big, quiet house. But something had changed. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the sound of my own quiet, resolute no. The house was no longer a museum of past sorrows. It was a battlefield, and I had just fired the first shot. The pressure was a constant, low-frequency hum beneath the surface of my days, a vibration that started in my phone and spread through the floorboards of the house. It wasn't one single event, not a thunderstorm, but a steady, corrosive drizzle of manipulation. The calls from Chloe began in the morning, her voice coated in a thick, sticky layer of manufactured concern. Just checking in, Mum. Did you take your pills? Are you remembering to eat? Every question was a small stone being placed on a scale, each one meant to tip the balance of my own sanity against me. Then came the texts, a rapid-fire assault of blue and grey bubbles on my screen. Mark, mostly. Links to articles about the benefits of community living for seniors. Photos of Willow Creek's manicured lawns, its residents smiling with a vacant, glossy perfection. They were like advertisements for my own obsolescence. The visits were the worst. They'd appear at the door unannounced, their arms full of groceries. I didn't need their faces, masks of strained filial piety. We were just in the neighborhood, Mum. Thought we'd make sure you were okay. They weren't checking if I was okay. They were checking if I had broken yet. The small cruelties started to accumulate like dust in the corners of a neglected room. My mail started going missing. Important letters, bills, a note from my cousin in Vermont. When I asked Chloe, her voice was a symphony of innocence. "Oh, Mom, are you sure you didn't just misplace it?" "It happens. Let me help you look." We'd search, and of course find nothing. She'd pat my arm. "Don't worry, I'll call the post office for you." She was creating a narrative of my incompetence, one lost letter at a time. Then the Wi-Fi password was changed. I went to turn on my tablet to listen to a podcast, to feel connected to a world outside these four walls, and a small box popped up, incorrect password. I tried again, and again. I called Chloe, a knot of frustration tightening in my stomach. "Oh, that," she said, her voice breezy, dismissive. "Mark changed it. For security. You know, with all the hacking these days. I wrote the new one down for you. It's on the fridge." It was on a small sticky note, a nonsensical jumble of letters and numbers. It wasn't about security. It was about control. It was about making me dependent on them for the smallest connection to the world, a reminder that they held the keys to my life. I felt like I was being slowly, methodically erased from my own home. My routines were disrupted, my confidence chipped away. I began to doubt myself. Did I forget where I put the mail? Was I becoming that fragile, confused old woman they saw me as? And in a moment of chilling clarity, I realized that was precisely their goal. They weren't just trying to get me out of the house. They were trying to convince me to leave my own mind. I needed to escape. Not the house itself, but them. Their presence, their digital tendrils, their suffocating care. I found myself climbing the narrow pull-down stairs to the one place in this house that was truly, unequivocally mine, because it had never been Richard's. The attic. Richard had hated it. He'd called it a useless space, a repository for dust and spiders. He'd gone up there exactly once the day we moved in, declared it structurally sound, but otherwise pointless, and never set foot on its floorboards again. For him, a space without a clear, practical function was an irritant. For me, it had become a forgotten kingdom. The air up there was thick, and still smelling of dried cedar ancient paper, and the slow, patient decay of time. A single bare bulb cast a weak, golden circle of light, leaving the eaves in deep shadow. Dust motes danced in the beam like tiny, silent spirits. This was where the past came to rest. Boxes of my old teaching materials, stacks of Leo's childhood drawings, my wedding dress, sealed in a garment bag that had yellowed with age. It was a museum of a life I barely recognized. I was looking for something to anchor me. Photo albums. I needed to see a picture of a younger Chloe, a Chloe whose smile wasn't a weapon, whose eyes didn't hold a flicker of calculation. I wanted proof of a time before her heart had been paved over by ambition. I moved past a stack of moth-eaten trunks, my knees creaking in protest. The floorboards groaned under my weight. My hand, covered in a fine grey powder, braced against the wall for support. And then I felt it. Not the solid, reassuring resistance of plaster and lath, but a subtle give, a hollowness. My fingers brushed against it again. It wasn't right. I tapped it with my knuckle. A dull, empty thud, completely different from the solid sound of the wall beside it. Curiosity. A feeling I hadn't truly felt in years sparked in my chest. I pushed my fingers, finding the edge of a poorly disguised seam. It felt like loose drywall hastily patched and painted over. I dug my nails into the crack pulling. A section of the wall about 3 feet square came away with a soft, crumbling sigh, releasing a puff of stale, trapped air. Behind it was a dark, square cavity, a hidden compartment. My heart hammered against my ribs. What on earth had Richard, the most transparently dull man I had ever known, needed to hide? For a wild moment, I imagined love letters, some secret dalliance. But that wasn't Richard's style. His sins were ones of omission, not passion. My hand reached into the darkness, my fingers closing around something solid, wrapped in thick, stiff fabric. It felt like oilcloth. I pulled it out. It was a heavy roll, and behind it another and another. There were dozens of them packed tightly into the space. And at the very back, my fingers found something else. A small, hard rectangle. I drew it out into the light. It was a book bound in dark leather, smooth and cool to the touch. A ledger. I carried my strange treasures to the center of the attic, to the small circle of light cast by the bare bulb. My hands were trembling as I laid them on the dusty floorboards. The oilcloth was stiff, cracked at the folds. I chose one of the rolls and began to untie the twine that held it. It was knotted with Richard's typical, infuriating efficiency. My fingers fumbled with it, finally working it loose. The canvas unrolled with a dry whispering sound, revealing its face to the light for what might have been the first time in decades. It was magnificent. It wasn't a dark, moody landscape like I'd half expected. It was a seascape, an explosion of light and water. The brushstrokes were alive, chaotic, yet precise, capturing the violent energy of waves crashing against rock. The colours were so vivid, the blues and greens so deep, the white of the sea foamed so bright, I could almost smell the salt and feel the spray on my face. It was beautiful, in a way that felt dangerous, full of a raw, untamed emotion that Richard, with his meticulously balanced checkbooks and his beige-coloured world, would never have understood, let alone owned. I looked closer, my eyes scanning the bottom corner of the canvas. There, in small, faded but unmistakable script, was a signature. C. Monet. I laughed. A short, sharp, incredulous bark of a sound that was swallowed by the thick silence of the attic. Monet. Of course. It was absurd. Richard considered art a frivolous, almost immoral waste of money. A painting can't fix a leaky roof, Eleanor, he used to say, as if that was the only metric by which a thing could be valued. These had to be prints. Expensive ones, perhaps bought during a phase he'd never mentioned. A secret hobby. The thought was almost charming. The boring accountant had a hidden passion for art reproductions. My hands, steadier, now reached for the leather-bound ledger. It fell open in my lap. The pages were filled with Richard's handwriting. Not the shaky script of an old man, but the precise, cramped, right-slanting letters I knew from 40 years of household budgets and tax forms. His hand was a tool for recording facts, devoid of flourish or feeling. But these weren't household expenses. The first page was a header. Acquisitions and placements. Below it, a series of neat ruled columns, date, institution, title, and two final columns that made the air freeze in my lungs. Original, with a checkmark box, and copy, with another. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. My eyes scanned the page, frantically searching. And there it was. Halfway down the third page, Institution Musée Marmottan, Monet, Paris. Title, Impression, Soleil Levant. Original. Copy. Swap date. 14/05, 1988. It wasn't a collection of prints. It was a list of heists, a meticulously documented record of crimes so audacious, so brilliant, they beggared belief. I flipped through the pages. Renoir, Degas, Pissarro, a Vermeer from the Rijksmuseum, a Cézanne from the Courtauld in London. Each entry was a ghost, a masterpiece stolen from the world and hidden in the dusty darkness of my attic. My husband, Richard, the man who complained about the cost of brand-name coffee. The man whose idea of a splurge was ordering an extra side of fries. The respectable, predictable, soul-crushingly boring accountant was a master art forger, one of the greatest art thieves in modern history. For decades, he had been traveling on business trips. I never questioned visiting the great museums of the world. And he hadn't been admiring the art. He had been replacing it, walking in with his own flawless copies and walking out with the real thing. This house, the one built with my inheritance, the one he always held over my head as a symbol of his sacrifice, wasn't just my home. It was a vault, a private illegal museum containing a fortune so vast it was literally unimaginable. His control, his stinginess, his relentless criticism of any small luxury I might desire. It was all a lie, a magnificent, sprawling 40-year lie. It wasn't about prudence. It was a cover, a performance to ensure no one would ever suspect that the man living in this modest Portland suburb was sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars in stolen art. A wave of nausea washed over me so strong I had to brace myself on the floor. I felt dizzy, unmoored from reality. My entire life, every memory I had of my marriage, was now reframed, tainted by this monstrous secret truth. The quiet disappointments, the silent resentments, the life I felt I had sacrificed for him. It was all a charade to protect his crimes. And then, bubbling up from the nausea, came a different feeling. A wild, hysterical laughter began to build in my chest, shaking my entire body. I tipped my head back and howled, the sound echoing in the rafters. It wasn't a laugh of joy. It was the laugh of a person who has just been told the punchline to the longest, cruelest joke in the world. The joke was on me. The joke was on the museums, the art experts, the world. The joke was on Richard himself, who had amassed a king's ransom and lived like a pauper, only to die and leave it all sitting in the dark. The sheer cosmic scale of the deceit was so profound, so complete, it was almost beautiful in its awfulness. The laughter subsided, leaving me hollowed out and shaking in the weak yellow light. The silence that rushed back in was different now. It wasn't empty. It was filled with the silent, priceless ghosts I had just unearthed. I was no longer just a grieving widow in a house that was too big for her. I was the curator of a criminal masterpiece, and I had no idea what to do. I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I couldn't go to the authorities. Not yet. To walk into a police station and declare my late husband a master art thief would be to invite a storm I couldn't possibly control. The FBI, the IRS, international agencies, they would descend on this house on me. My life would become a public spectacle. And Chloe and Mark, they would use it. They would paint me as a confused, delusional old woman, or worse, an accomplice. They would have me declared incompetent, in a heartbeat seize control of the estate, and hand the whole mess over to the authorities in exchange for a clean break and a hefty reward. I would lose everything. My newfound power was also a poison chalice. I was sitting on a fortune that could solve all my problems, but the fortune itself was the biggest problem of all. The pressure from downstairs didn't stop. In fact, it escalated. My quiet defiance seemed to have spooked them. They were no longer just nudging. They were shoving. Chloe's calls became more frequent, her tone sharper. "Mum, we're really worried about you. You seem withdrawn. You're not yourself. Mark and I have been talking, and we think it's time to seriously consider getting you a full-time professional assessment for your own good." The threat was no longer veiled. They were preparing to file for conservatorship to strip me of my autonomy under the guise of love. It was Mark who set the next trap. I had made the mistake of mentioning in a moment of weakness that I was clearing out some of Richard's old things from the attic. His eyes had lit up a predatory gleam he tried to mask with concern. A few days later, he called. "Mum, I had a thought." He began, his voice smooth as oil. "Since you're sorting through Dad's things, You might find some stuff with a bit of value. I know a guy, an art appraiser, excellent reputation. I could have him pop by just to take a look. No charge, of course. Just to make sure you don't accidentally throw away something valuable. He was testing me. He didn't know about the paintings, not the real ones, but he was fishing. He wanted to see what I had, and more importantly, he wanted his own man on the inside to assess the real value of the house and its contents, and to assess me. A man named Mr. Abernathy arrived the following Tuesday. He was exactly as I'd pictured him, tall, thin, dressed in a suit that was a little too shiny, with a smile that never reached his cold, calculating eyes. He smelled of expensive cologne and cheap ambition. "Mrs. Sterling, a pleasure," he said, taking my hand and holding it for a moment too long. He patted it, a gesture of patronizing reassurance that set my teeth on edge. "Mark has told me so much about you. I'm just here to help in any way I can." I led him into the living room. I hadn't dared bring the Monet or the Vermeer down from the attic. Instead, I had chosen one of the lesser-known pieces from the stash, a beautiful, but not instantly recognizable post-impressionist still life. I had propped it up on the mantelpiece. Abernathy barely glanced at it. He gave it the kind of cursory look one gives a menu in a diner they have no intention of eating at. His eyes were already moving, darting around the room, cataloguing the furniture, the silver candlesticks, the square footage. He wasn't appraising the art. He was appraising the assets. "Ah, yes," he said, turning back to the painting with a dismissive wave of his hand. "A lovely piece. Very charming." He stepped closer, squinting for show. "It's a decent replica, my dear. A very good one, in fact. Probably from the 50s or 60s. People used to buy them for decoration." He turned to me, his smile widening. "It has sentimental value, I'm sure, but in terms of market value, negligible." He let the word hang in the air between us. "Tell you what," he continued, leaning in conspiratorially. "I have a few clients who collect these sorts of decorative pieces. I could probably get you a few $100s for it. Take it off your hands, save you the trouble of disposing of it." A chill, clear as glass, settled over me. I saw it all. Mark had sent him. This man wasn't an appraiser. He was a vulture sent to pick at the bones of my life. He was here to confirm that I was a naive old woman easily parted from her possessions, a woman who wouldn't put up a fight when they came for the house. He was here to appraise my weakness. I looked at him, at his slicked back hair, and his insincere smile. For the first time in a long time, I felt not fear, but a cold, hard anger. He thought I was a fool. They all did. I drew myself up, my voice steady and polite, betraying none of the fury roiling inside me. "That's very generous of you, Mr. Abernathy," I said, meeting his gaze. "But I think I'll hold on to it. As you say, it has sentimental value." His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He had expected me to be grateful, to leap at the offer. My polite refusal was a move he hadn't anticipated. He recovered quickly, clapping his hands together. Of course. I completely understand. Well, my offer stands if you change your mind." I showed him to the door. As he left, I saw him glance back at the house, his eyes lingering on the second-story windows, the roofline, the size of the lot. He was already calculating his commission. Closing the door, I leaned against it, the wood cool against my back. I had survived the first skirmish, but I knew with chilling certainty that it was only the beginning. They would be back, and they would be more aggressive next time. I couldn't fight them alone. Desperation is a powerful clarifying agent. It burns away the trivialities, the hesitations, the fear of causing a scene. After Abernathy's visit, I knew I was out of time. I had a secret that could destroy my family or save my life, and I couldn't carry it alone for another day. There was only one person in the world I trusted not to look at me and see a dollar sign or a burden: Leo. He came over that evening ostensibly to fix the Wi-Fi that Mark had secured for me. He found me in the kitchen staring into a cup of cold tea. The house felt heavy, laden with the weight of the secrets in the attic. "Grandma, you okay?" he asked, dropping his backpack on the floor. He had Richard's dark hair, but my eyes, and right now they were full of genuine concern. "Leo," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "I need to show you something, and you have to promise me you won't think I've lost my mind." His brow furrowed. "Okay, promise." I led him not to the router, but to the pull-down stairs to the attic. He followed me up into the dusty golden light, a look of confusion on his face. I didn't speak. I simply walked over to the center of the room where I had left one of the canvases unrolled. It was the Saison, a landscape of Provence, so alive with color and heat, it seemed to radiate warmth into the dusty air. Leo stopped dead. He stared at the painting, his mouth slightly agape. "Whoa," he breathed. "Where did you get that? Your grandfather—" I said, my voice flat. Then I handed him the leather ledger. He sat on an old trunk, the book open on his knees, his face illuminated by the light of his phone as he cross-referenced the names and dates. I watched him, my heart pounding. I watched his eyes widen, his expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief, and finally to a look of pure, unadulterated awe. He let out a low whistle. "This is insane, Grandma," he said, looking up at me, his eyes shining with a strange new light. He wasn't scared or judgmental. He was thrilled. Like Netflix-level insane. Grandpa Richard, the guy who used to lecture me for 15 minutes about leaving the lights on. He was a real-life Thomas Crown. His reaction was so unexpected, so completely opposite to the fear and shame I had been drowning in, that it felt like a lifeline. He didn't see a senile old woman spinning fantasies. He saw the truth, and he saw it for what it was, an incredible, dangerous, and magnificent conspiracy. He stood up, pacing the small open space, buzzing with an energy that filled the entire attic. "We can't go to the cops," he said, thinking out loud. "They'd lock this place down in a second. And Mom and Mark—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "They're the vultures, aren't they? They've been circling." It was the validation I needed. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't imagining it. "Okay," he said, pulling out his phone again, his fingers flying across the screen with a speed I could never comprehend. "Okay. We need an expert, but not a local one. Not some Abernathy clown who's in Mark's pocket. We need someone who can't be bought. Someone who is untouchable." He was deep in his own world, now a world of online forums, university archives, and digital backchannels. I watched him, a 17-year-old boy, armed with a smartphone navigating a world I didn't understand, to solve a problem from a world that was long dead. "Got it," he said, after a few minutes, a triumphant grin on his face. He held up his phone. On the screen was a grainy photo of a man with wild white hair, piercing eyes, and a look of fierce intelligence. Dr. Alistair Finch, art historian, used to be a big deal at Cambridge. Wrote the definitive book on post-impressionist forgery techniques. "What happened to him?" I asked. "He got fired," Leo said, his grin widening. "Publicly accused a major museum donor, some billionaire, of owning a fake. The museum backed the donor, of course. Finch was disgraced. Ruined his career. Now he lives in quiet retirement in Seattle. The article says he hates the entire art establishment, thinks it's all corrupt." He looked at me, his eyes gleaming. "He's perfect." I hesitated. This was no longer just a secret I held in my heart. This was taking a step. This was inviting a stranger into the conspiracy, making it real, making it dangerous. Fear, cold and familiar, coiled in my stomach. Could I do this? Could I, Eleanor Sterling, a 72-year-old widow, orchestrate something like this? As if on cue, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter downstairs. I knew without looking that it would be Chloe. Or Mark. Another check-in. Another passive-aggressive nudge toward the door. I walked down the creaking attic stairs and into the kitchen. There on the polished granite countertop, right where I would see it, was a crisp, white envelope. It hadn't been there when Leo arrived. Chloe must have dropped it off while we were in the attic, a silent, menacing delivery. My name was typed on the front. My hands trembled as I tore it open. It wasn't a letter. It was a formal-looking document. A notice. An official notice of their intent to file for eviction pending a competency hearing. The fear that had been gripping me for weeks didn't just recede. It was burned away, incinerated by a blast of cold, hard resolve. This piece of paper was a declaration of war. They had left me no choice. I was no longer a victim. I was a woman with a secret weapon hidden in her attic. I walked back to the bottom of the attic stairs where Leo was waiting, his face anxious. I held up the eviction notice. Find his email address. I said, my voice a stranger's, low and steady. We're sending a message to Dr. Finch. The official envelope arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a courier who looked barely old enough to drive. It felt heavier than it should not, with paper, but with purpose. I slit it open with the silver letter opener Richard had given me for our 10th anniversary, an irony so thick I could taste it. The legalese was dense, a forest of paragraphs designed to obscure the ugly truth at its heart. But the words they wanted me to see were clear enough. Conservatorship. Incompetence. Paranoia. They'd used my own words against me, or rather the words Chloe had likely typed for me. There were screenshots from my Facebook page posts from the weeks after Richard's death. One asking how to reset the television remote, another wondering where I'd put my reading glasses. Mundane moments of senior forgetfulness, now reframed as evidence of a mind in complete collapse. They cited my increasingly erratic behavior and my unwillingness to accept necessary care. Then came the centerpiece of their argument, my fantastical and fraudulent narrative regarding the contents of the attic, a story I had confusedly relayed to my grandson Leo, causing him undue distress. They weren't just trying to put me in a home. They were trying to legally erase the person I was, to overwrite my reality with their own self-serving fiction. The woman described in those papers was a ghost, a feeble-minded creature of their own invention. And she was about to become my greatest weapon. I didn't cry. The time for tears was over, washed away by a tide of cold, clarifying rage. I picked up the phone and called Leo. My voice was steady, a low, quiet thing that held none of the hysteria they'd described in their petition. Leo, I said, it's here. Grandma, are you okay? His voice was laced with the frantic energy of youth. I'll come over right now. No, not yet. I need the name you mentioned, the lawyer. There was a pause, the sound of furious typing. Jessica Albright. Albright and Associates. She's a shark grandma. In a good way. She specializes in elder law, specifically fighting predatory conservatorships. Send me her number. I'm sending it now. I can call for you. No, I said the word a small hard stone. This is a call I have to make myself. Jessica Albright's office was in a sleek glass tower downtown that seemed to pierce the perpetually grey Portland sky. It was the kind of place that smelled of quiet money and ruthless efficiency. The woman herself was exactly as Leo had described. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a severe knot, and eyes that didn't just see you, they assessed you. She wore a tailored black suit that looked like armor. She didn't offer me tea or coffee. She offered me a glass of water and her undivided attention. I sat opposite her at a large, empty mahogany desk. I had brought the papers. I had also brought one of the smaller canvases from the attic, a little landscape of the French countryside, wrapped in an old linen sheet. I told her everything. I started with Richard's death, the staged funeral, Chloe and Mark's saccharine offer to move me to Willow Creek. I told her about the attic, the dust, the hidden panel. I told her about the paintings, dozens of them, and the leather-bound ledger that chronicled their theft. I explained my suspicions about Abernathy, the sham appraiser Mark had sent to test my defences. Throughout my story, Jessica Albright did not interrupt. She didn't take a single note. She just watched me, her gaze unwavering, her expression unreadable. I expected skepticism, pity, perhaps even a gentle suggestion that I see a psychiatrist. When I finally fell silent, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the city outside. She leaned forward slightly, her hands steepled on the polished wood. Her eyes, which I had thought were black, were a deep, intelligent brown. They were gleaming. "They think you're a frail old lady," she said. Her voice was as sharp and clean as cut glass. Confused, paranoid, easily manipulated. I nodded, my throat tight. "That's what the papers say." "Good," she said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "We're going to let them keep thinking that. We're going to let them think they have you cornered, that this hearing is a mere formality. We will play the part you've been assigned." She gestured to the legal documents on her desk. "According to this, you're a doddering, paranoid woman who has invented a treasure in her attic to avoid facing the reality of her own decline." "And what do we do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Her smile widened. "We let them build their case. We let them get confident. We let them underestimate you at every single turn, right up until the moment we liquidate their entire future." She finally looked at the canvas I'd brought, still wrapped in its sheet. "But first things first. Before we can use your treasure, we have to prove it exists. This fantastical narrative of yours needs a footnote from an expert. I think I know who to call." I said my mind already on Leo's other discovery, the disgraced art historian in Seattle. "I'll draft our initial response to the court," Jessica said, standing up, the meeting clearly over. "A request for a continuance. We'll cite the need for time to gather our own evidence to find you proper counsel. It's standard. It will make us look flustered and unprepared. It will make them relax." She walked me to the door. "Go home. Be the sweet, confused old woman they think you are. Let your son-in-law think his plan is working perfectly. The game is afoot." That evening, I sat at my dining room table, the same table where Mark had so casually announced his plan to sell my life for parts. In front of me was my laptop, a device Chloe had once insisted I get to stay connected, probably so she could monitor me. With Leo's guidance over the phone, I found the university profile for Dr. Alistair Finch. There was a grainy photo of a man with a shock of white hair and an expression of permanent academic irritation. I composed a short, carefully worded email. I attached a few photos I'd taken with my phone, a corner of a floral still life that pulsed with colour, a sliver of a seascape, with a signature that looked suspiciously like Monet. I didn't mention my husband or my children. I simply said I was an elderly woman who had recently discovered some family heirlooms and required a private consultation. I pressed send, the click of the mouse, sounding like the cocking of a gun. The first move in a war. They didn't even know I was fighting. Dr. Finch arrived 2 days later, not in a sensible sedan as I'd expected, but in a taxi that wheezed to the curb. He exploded out of the car, a whirlwind of tweed elbow patches and righteous indignation. He was thinner in person, with a frantic energy that seemed barely contained by his rumpled suit. He bypassed my offered hand and marched straight into the foyer, his nostrils flaring as if he could already smell the presence of art. "The lighting in here is atrocious," he announced, his voice a booming baritone that was entirely at odds with his frail frame. "Where are they?" I led him up the creaking stairs to the attic. The air was still thick with the ghosts of dust and time. I'd left everything as I'd found it. The canvases were leaning in stacks against the wall, the ledger resting on a wooden trunk. Finch stopped at the threshold, his breath catching in a little hiss. For a moment, his frantic energy stilled. He stepped inside, not like an appraiser, but like a pilgrim entering a holy shrine. He didn't speak. He simply moved from canvas to canvas, his long, pale fingers hovering inches from their surfaces, as if afraid to touch, yet desperate to feel their power. He would stare at a brushstroke for a full minute, his head cocked, muttering to himself in a low, academic rumble. He picked up a small, dark painting of a starry night over a river. His hands, which had seemed so unsteady, were now rock solid. The impasto, he whispered, his voice trembling with a kind of sacred fury. Look at it. No forger on earth can replicate that kind of desperate, passionate, soul-tearing application of paint. This is Vincent. He gently placed it back down, as if it were a sleeping child. My God. It's the one that went missing from the private collection in Zurich in '87. He spent hours like that, a man possessed. He identified a Degas sculpture study, a Pissarro street scene, and the Monet seascape I had sent him a picture of. With each identification, his indignation grew. This is a desecration. To keep these titans of human achievement locked away in a dusty attic, it's a crime against civilization itself. I let him work my own shock mounting with every name he uttered. I had known they were valuable. I had not comprehended the scale. This wasn't a treasure. It was a king's ransom. Finally, he sat down heavily on the trunk, wiping a sheen of sweat from his brow with the back of a tweed-covered arm. By my most conservative off-the-cuff and likely wildly inaccurate estimate, he huffed, you are sitting on upwards of $200 million. Possibly more. The Van Gogh alone. He trailed off, shaking his head in disbelief. My legs felt weak. $200 million. The number was abstract, meaningless. It was Richard's secret, a number so large it was its own form of silence. But what is this? Dr. Finch asked, his attention shifting. He reached for the leather ledger. He opened it. His eyes scanning the neat columns of Richard's handwriting. He flipped through the pages, a frown deepening on his face. Tucked into the back sleeve, almost an afterthought, was a single faded photograph. He pulled it out. The photo was worn, the corners soft with age. It showed a much younger Richard, probably in his late 30s. He was smiling a genuine, unguarded smile I hadn't seen in decades. He had his arm around a woman. A beautiful woman with dark, intelligent eyes and a cascade of dark hair. She was not me. They were standing on a bridge, the Eiffel Tower hazy in the background. On the back, in faint looping script, was a single inscription, Anneliese. Paris, 1988. Anneliese, Dr. Finch murmured, holding the photo closer. His eyes widened in recognition. Good heavens, I know this woman. Anneliese Dubois. She was a restorer, a genius, worked at the Louvre in the late 80s, knew pigments and canvas better than she knew herself. There was a scandal. Several small but significant pieces went missing over a period of 2 years. Nothing was ever proven, but the suspicion fell on the restoration department. Then in the early 90s, she just vanished. The official story was that she'd taken her own life, drowned in the Seine, but they never found a body. A cold dread entirely different from the shock I'd been feeling began to snake its way up my spine. The timeline. 1988. Richard had told me he was at a sales conference in Germany for 3 weeks that summer. I remembered being annoyed at how little he called. Leo? I said, my voice hoarse. I'd insisted he be here for Finch's visit. He was sitting quietly on the stairs, watching the whole scene unfold with wide eyes. Can you look up a name for me, Anneliese Dubois? Leo pulled out his tablet, his fingers flying across the screen. The silence in the attic stretched taut and thin. Got it, he said after a minute. There's not much. a few mentions in some old art journals, and here, an obituary from a small local paper in Nice. It's dated 1992. What does it say? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. Annelise Dubois' beloved mother passed away unexpectedly. She is survived by her loving son. Leo squinted at the screen. Her loving son, Mark. The name hung in the dusty air. Mark, my son-in-law. The man trying to steal my house. The man whose mother was my husband's accomplice. My husband's mistress. Dr. Finch looked from the photograph to me, his face a mask of dawning horror. Leo just stared, his mouth slightly agape. It all clicked into place, a series of horrible, jagged puzzle pieces. Richard wasn't just a thief. He was an adulterer. His partner in crime, the brilliant restorer who helped him steal and replace masterworks of art, was the mother of the man my daughter had married. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a legacy, a twisted generational inheritance of deceit. Mark wasn't just coming for a house. He wasn't just a greedy developer seeing a prime piece of real estate. He was coming to claim what he must have felt on some subconscious level was his birthright. He was trying to finish the job his mother had started. He was coming for his mother's half of the criminal empire. She and my husband had built an empire hidden behind the drywall of my own home. The knowledge was a poison. It seeped into the marrow of my bones, a betrayal so profound it rewrote the entire history of my marriage. Every anniversary, every shared meal, every quiet evening was now tainted, a lie layered upon another lie. The quiet cruelty I had endured for decades wasn't just the product of a bitter man. It was the vigilance of a criminal guarding his hoard. His disappointment in me wasn't because I wasn't enough. It was because I wasn't her. I wasn't his partner in crime. I was just the camouflage. But as the poison spread, something else happened. It burned away the last vestiges of my grief, the last lingering threads of my loyalty to the man Richard was, or the man I thought he was. It cauterized the wound. The pain was immense, but it gave way to a chilling, diamond-hard clarity. This was no longer just about saving my home. This was about justice. My revenge would not be a simple legal victory. It couldn't be. It had to be a masterpiece. It had to be as intricate, as patient, and as devastatingly effective as one of Richard's forgeries. It had to dismantle their lives from the inside out, using the very thing they craved, wealth status, the appearance of success, as the instrument of their destruction. My next meeting with Jessica was different. I told her about Annelise Dubois. I showed her the photograph. I told her that our opponent wasn't just my son-in-law. He was the heir to the crime. Jessica listened, her expression unchanging, but I saw a new light in her eyes. It was the look of a predator that has just been shown a fatal weakness in its prey. This changes everything, she said, her voice low and excited. This isn't just greed. It's a narrative. It's Freudian. It's biblical. The sins of the father and the mother. A jury would eat this alive, but we're not going to let it get to a jury. A courtroom is too blunt an instrument for what you need to do. What do I need to do? I asked. We need to create a structure, she said, already pacing in front of her window, her mind clearly racing. We can't touch the art. It's stolen property. The moment we try to sell it, we become accessories. But we can appraise it. We can insure it. And we can leverage it. The plan she laid out was audacious. With Dr. Finch's official notarized authentication of the collection's value, we could secure a significant line of credit, not from a bank that would create a paper trail. Jessica knew a private equity lender who specialized in unique collateral. The loan would be the seed money for our war chest. First we delay, she said, ticking points off on her fingers. We file motions. We request discovery. We bury them in paperwork. We make the conservatorship, hearing a constantly receding point on the horizon. While they're focused on the legal battle, We build our own structure, a fortress, and so we did. 2 weeks later, with capital secured against a single heavily insured Monet, we officially incorporated the Eleanor Vance Foundation for Art Restoration and Recovery. Its mission statement was simple and noble: to locate and repatriate stolen works of art to their rightful owners. Its board of directors consisted of myself, Jessica, and Dr. Finch. Its existence was for now a secret. The second part of the plan was my own. If they were going to paint me as a confused old woman, I would become the most beloved, gentle, harmless old woman in the digital world. You want me to do what I asked Leo, staring at the glowing phone screen he was holding. Create an Instagram account, he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Chloe and my dad live on this stuff. It's their whole world. Their identity is built on what other people think of them. So we're going to build you an identity they can't fight. It felt absurd. Me, a woman who still wrote checks at the grocery store, becoming an influencer. But I saw the brutal logic in it. I was playing their game. Leo was a patient teacher. He showed me how to take photos with the right light, how to use filters to make my kitchen look warm and my roses look vibrant. He taught me about captions and hashtags. Grandma's gardening, baking love, simple living. My first post was a picture of the sourdough starter I'd been nursing for years. I wrote, "Some things just get better with time. Patience and a little warmth are all it takes." The hypocrisy was delicious. The account, Taught Eleanor's golden years, grew slowly at first. Pictures of me knitting a scarf, a short video of me kneading bread, my hands dusted with flour, a photo of Richard's empty armchair by the fire with a caption about memory and moving forward. It was a carefully curated fiction of gentle grief and quiet resilience. I was everything Chloe and Mark pretended to be: authentic, content, wholesome. I was a sweet old lady, pottering about in her garden, completely unaware of the darkness gathering around her. And from the safety of my quiet house, I watched and I waited, tending to my Instagram feed, while Jessica and her team prepared to burn their world to the ground. While I was busy cultivating my online persona as America's most harmless grandmother, Jessica and her team were exhuming the truth. She worked with a forensic accountant, a quiet man with tired eyes who could make spreadsheets sing like a canary. They didn't just dig, they excavated. The first report came in a plain manila folder. Jessica slid it across her desk to me. "Mark Delacourt," she began, her voice crisp, "is a house of cards in a hurricane." It turned out Mark's latest luxury condo development, The Pinnacle, which he and Chloe loved to post about from the construction site wearing matching hard hats, was a financial disaster. He'd funded it not with investors, as he claimed, but with a series of high-interest predatory loans. The project was over budget, behind schedule, and the initial loans were coming due. The sale of my house wasn't just a bonus for him. It was the dike that would stop the flood. Without that infusion of cash, his entire company would be underwater within 6 months. He wasn't just greedy. He was desperate. The second report was on Chloe, my daughter. Her file was thinner, but in many ways sadder. Her life, so beautifully documented on TikTok and Instagram, was a fantasy financed by debt. The designer clothes, the exclusive resort vacations, the charity luncheons, all paid for, with a half-dozen credit cards, each one maxed out to its limit. She was paying the minimum on each, a high-wire act of financial juggling that was bound to fail. She wasn't living a life of luxury. She was renting one post by post. "They're vulnerable," Jessica said, her eyes glinting. "Their public image is their center of gravity. If we knock it off balance, they'll fall." Our strategy was surgical. We wouldn't attack them directly. We would simply introduce a little bit of truth into their ecosystem of lies and watch it work like a virus. Jessica's team drafted a series of anonymous tips. They didn't come from a law firm. They came from burner email accounts with names like Concerned Investor 22 and Portland Truth Teller. A well-regarded local financial blogger received a tip about irregularities in the Pinnacle's funding. An article appeared a week later, cautiously questioning the project's viability. It was small, but it was a start. Investors started making nervous phone calls. A larger tip, complete with sourced documents from the public record about permits and liens, went to a journalist at the Oregonian. Then we turned to Chloe. The information sent to the credit card companies was more direct. An anonymous fraud prevention alert, suggesting a review of her spending-to-income ratio. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday. A subcontractor on Mark's project, spooked by the blog post and unpaid for 6 weeks, filed a mechanics lien against the Pinnacle. It was a public record. It was humiliating. Mark's confident Instagram posts about building the future of Portland stopped. The second crack was even more public. Chloe was at a charity luncheon, filming a day in the life TikTok video. She made a great show of paying for the entire table's lunch, a grand gesture of philanthropy for her followers. Leo showed me the video later that night. I watched my daughter smiling her bright, brittle camera smile hand, her Amex, to the waiter. I watched the waiter return, lean in, and whisper something to her. I watched the smile flicker. She tried to laugh it off, fumbling in her purse for another card. It was also declined. The video cut off abruptly, but not before you could see the hot flush of shame creep up her neck. The clip went viral in certain local circles, hashtagged #Chloe declined. Their desperation, once a quiet hum beneath the surface, became a frantic roar. The calls and texts, which had been patronizing and gently manipulative, turned ugly. "I don't know what game you're playing." Eleanor Mark's voice snarled through my phone one afternoon. "But it's over. The hearing is in a month. You're going to Willow Creek, and we are selling the house." End of discussion. Chloe's texts were a stream of consciousness, a torrent of guilt and rage. "How could you let this happen? My friends are all talking. You're being selfish. You're ruining everything. After all we've done for you." They were getting sloppy. Their pressure was no longer cloaked in concern. It was a naked threat. And every angry voicemail, every coercive text was being meticulously logged by Jessica's team, added to the growing mountain of evidence for a battle they thought they were winning. Meanwhile, on my Instagram, I posted a photo of a freshly baked apple pie cooling on the windowsill. The caption read, "Patience is the secret ingredient. Some things are worth waiting for." Underneath a comment from a new follower read, "You seem like the sweetest person. Your family is so lucky to have you." I smiled. The web was woven. The trap was set. All I had to do now was invite them in. The air in the Portland Art Museum was thick with the scent of money and lilies. It hung in the high vaulted ceilings, clinging to the velvet ropes and the polished marble floors. A low, cultured hum of conversation was the evening's soundtrack, punctuated by the delicate clink of champagne flutes. I stood near a towering sculpture, a twisting column of bronze that seemed to be writhing in silent agony, and felt a kinship with it. My own nerves were a tangled knot in my stomach. From across the grand hall, I watched them. Chloe and Mark. They were working the room, gliding through clusters of the city's elite like sharks in a tailored suit and a couture gown. Chloe would laugh a light tinkling sound she had perfected, placing a hand on the arm of some city councilman. Mark would follow with a firm handshake and a low, confidential murmur. They looked magnificent, powerful. The perfect couple grieving gracefully while still attending to their social duties. I saw the glances they threw my way, quick, dismissive, laced with a triumphant pity. They believed this was my final spectacular act of self-destruction, the culmination of my supposed descent into senile delusion. Jessica, my lawyer, had briefed me on their narrative. They'd been telling everyone who would listen. Mother isn't well, Chloe would say, her voice trembling with practiced concern. She mortgaged the house for this party. We're so worried. The hearing is tomorrow, thank God. We can finally get her the help she needs. They saw this gala not as the launch of a foundation, but as Exhibit A, in their case, for my incompetence. The final nail in the coffin of my autonomy. I clutched the small, discreet note cards in my hand. My fingers were cold, but my palm was slick with sweat. I wore a simple navy blue dress, elegant but unassuming. It was a deliberate choice. I was meant to look like a relic, a frail old woman out of her depth, a ghost haunting her own life's final chapter. I had to let them see the woman they wanted to see, the woman they had tried to create. Leo was somewhere above in the tech booth overlooking the hall. He was my silent sentinel, my partner, in this grand, terrifying act of arson. We had done a tech rehearsal that afternoon. He'd shown me the controls, the way the large screen behind the podium would light up on his cue. His presence, unseen, but deeply felt, was the only thing keeping my knees from buckling. 5 minutes, Eleanor, a young event coordinator, whispered, her eyes full of the same pity I'd seen in everyone else's. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. I took a slow walk toward the front of the room, my sensible shoes making no sound on the floor. People parted for me, offering weak, sympathetic smiles. I was the tragic figure of the evening, the dear, confused old mother. Mark caught my eye as I passed. He gave me a slow, smug smile, a look that said, "It's almost over. You've lost." Chloe stood beside him, her arm looped through his, her expression a perfect mask of loving worry. It was a performance worthy of an award. I hoped she was enjoying it. It was her last. As I reached the small set of stairs leading to the podium, I felt a hand on my elbow. It was Jessica. She wasn't smiling. Her expression was all business, her dark eyes sharp and focused. "Remember," she murmured, her voice low and steady, a lifeline in the swirling tide of my anxiety. "You are not asking for their approval. You are not defending yourself. You are making a statement of fact. You are the sole authority on your own life. Let them choke on it." I squeezed her hand and nodded. She stepped back, blending into the crowd near the stage. I took a deep breath, the scent of lilies and perfume filling my lungs, and walked up the steps. The lights felt hotter up here. The low hum of the room quieted as I adjusted the microphone. Hundreds of faces turned toward me, a sea of polite, expectant, and pitying eyes. In the front row, Chloe dabbed at the corner of her eye with a tissue, a perfect solitary tear for her poor lost mother. Mark put a comforting arm around her, his gaze fixed on me, his jaw tight with anticipation. He was ready for the rambling, incoherent speech that would seal my fate. I cleared my throat. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence. "Good evening." I began, my voice steadier than I expected. It was the voice of a woman who had spent 50 years hosting dinner parties, a voice of quiet, domestic authority. "Thank you all for coming tonight. It means a great deal to see so many friends and so many influential members of our community." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I looked at Chloe and Mark. Their smiles were fixed plastic. "Many of you knew my late husband, Richard. You knew him as a quiet man, a pillar of his community, a dedicated financial advisor who helped so many people plan for their futures." I saw a few people in the audience nod, their expressions softening with fond remembrance. Chloe's sorrowful mask deepened. He was a man of routine, of quiet habits. But behind that quiet exterior, Richard harbored a secret, a lifelong clandestine passion that he shared with no one, not even with me. The room was still. The curiosity was palpable. They were leaning in, expecting a sweet, sentimental revelation. A story about a hidden love for woodworking, or perhaps a secret garden. Mark's smirk widened slightly. This was it. The pathetic, rambling anecdote he'd been waiting for. Richard. I continued, my voice taking on a new edge, a harder, clearer tone. Was a passionate lover of art. I let that sink in. It was innocuous enough. Confusing, perhaps, but not alarming. I could feel their collective mental shrug. So what? He didn't just admire it from afar. He wanted to be close to it, to possess it, to understand it from the inside out. He spent decades cultivating this passion in secret. In the one place in our home I never went, the one place he knew would remain his sanctuary. I looked out at them, my gaze sweeping across the room, before landing once again on my daughter and her husband. He pursued his passion in our attic. A flicker of confusion crossed Mark's face. Chloe's brow furrowed. This wasn't the script they had imagined. And now, I said, my voice ringing with a strength that surprised even me, I'd like to share a piece of his secret world with you. I gave the slightest nod. High above in the darkness of the tech booth, Leo hit the key. The massive screen behind me, which had been a tasteful dark blue, flared to life. But it wasn't a photo of Richard and me on our wedding day. It wasn't a picture of our family, of Chloe as a child. It was a black and white photograph, grainy and timeless. A young, handsome Richard, his hair slicked back, a confident, predatory smile on his face. And standing beside him, her hand on his arm, her head tilted towards his, with an air of intimate conspiracy, was a striking woman with dark, intelligent eyes. They were in Paris. The Eiffel Tower was faint in the background. A collective, audible gasp rippled through the hall. It was a sound like wind rushing through dry leaves. I saw Mark's face. The colour drained from it instantly, leaving behind a waxy grey pallor. His smug smile vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed horror. Chloe stared at the screen, her mouth a perfect O of disbelief. She didn't understand what she was seeing, not yet. But Mark did. Oh, he understood perfectly. This, I announced into the stunned silence, is my husband Richard in 1991. And this is his accomplice. The word accomplice landed like a stone in a still pond. The murmurs started a low, panicked buzz. For 50 years, I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a blade, my husband was one of the most prolific art forgers and thieves of the modern era. The attic of my home, the home my daughter and son-in-law are so eager to sell, is not filled with junk. It is a private, illegal museum. It contains dozens of masterpieces stolen from galleries and private collections across Europe and North America. I paused, letting the sheer insanity of the statement settle. People were on their feet now, whispering frantically to one another. Journalists were already scribbling in notebooks, their faces alight with the story of a lifetime. He was a genius, I continued, my voice cold and clear. He would create a perfect replica, a forgery so brilliant it could fool the experts. Then he would find a way to swap it for the original. He kept a detailed ledger of every single theft, every painting, every artist, every museum he violated. I looked directly at Chloe. Her face was a mess of confusion and dawning horror. The perfect tear she had feigned earlier was now replaced by real ones streaking her meticulous makeup. The contents of that attic, which have been authenticated by Dr. Alistair Finch. I gestured to where Finch stood near the back, looking grimly satisfied, have a conservative value of over $200 million. The room erupted. It was no longer a murmur. It was a roar. The shock was a physical force, a wave that washed over the hall. Mark looked like he had been turned to stone. He was staring at the picture at his mother's face, frozen in time with the man who had orchestrated her ruin. Therefore, I shouted over the din, my voice cracking with the sheer force of it. I am announcing the formation of the Dubois-Grayson Foundation. I had to use her name. I had to link them forever. The Foundation's first and most important mission will be to repatriate every single stolen work of art to its rightful home, to cleanse my house, and to undo the damage my husband caused. The crowd began to quiet, straining to hear the final, unbelievable act of this drama. But its second mission, I said, my voice dropping, becoming intimate venomous, will be to establish a permanent global fund to expose art fraud. A fund to hunt down the forgers, the thieves, and their conspirators. A fund to undo the damage done by men like Richard. I let the silence hang for a beat, savouring it. I looked at Mark, whose eyes were wide with terror, pleading with me silently. There would be no mercy. And his accomplice, Annalise Dubois. Your mother, Mark. Chaos. Pure, unadulterated chaos. It was as if a bomb had gone off in the Portland Art Museum. The roar of the crowd was deafening. Flashes from cameras strobed across the room, turning the scene into a series of fractured, nightmarish still frames. Mark Ashen stumbling backward as if he'd been physically struck. Chloe, her face contorted in a mask of ugly public humiliation, a raw, guttural sob tearing from her throat. It wasn't a cry of shame for the crimes committed. It was the sound of a socialite watching her world burn to the ground on live television. Security guards rushed toward the stage, but Jessica was there, a formidable wall, speaking calmly but firmly directing them to form a protective circle. I remained at the podium, watching the inferno I had lit. I saw Mark grab Chloe's arm, his movements jerky and panicked, and drag her through the swarming crowd toward an exit. They were swallowed by the wave of bodies of shouting journalists and horrified guests. They were gone. The fallout was not just immediate, it was explosive. Before the last of the champagne had even been cleared away, the story was a supernova. My phone in Jessica's possession was vibrating itself into oblivion. Leo came down from the tech booth, his face pale, but his eyes shining with a wild, triumphant energy. He held up his own phone. It's everywhere he breathed, his voice filled with awe. Attic Monet is the #1 trend on Twitter, worldwide. He showed me the screen. A tsunami of posts articles and frantic live news reports. Grieving widow exposes late husband as art heist mastermind. Portland socialites implicated in 200 million art fraud ring. The Monet in the attic, an elderly woman's revenge. My face was next to the picture of Richard and Annalise, a story of quiet domesticity shattered by spectacular crime. The next morning, there was no conservatorship hearing. There was nothing to hear. Jessica received a call at 7 a.m. from Mark's lawyer. The petition was withdrawn with prejudice. It was over. But for them, it was just beginning. The SEC froze Mark's assets. The FBI announced a joint investigation with Interpol. Every investor in his over-leveraged real estate projects pulled out in a single panicked afternoon. He was ruined, not just financially, but utterly. His name, his mother's name, was now synonymous with one of the most audacious art crimes of the century. I did not press charges against Chloe. There was no need. Jessica advised against it, calling it a distraction. My silence was a far more elegant and far more brutal punishment. I cut her out of my life with the surgical precision of a diamond cutter. The first time she called her number flashing on my phone, I let it ring until it went to voicemail. The second time, I blocked it. I instructed Jessica to handle any and all communication. There was nothing left to say. Her punishment wasn't a prison cell. It was the life she was now forced to live. The mansion they lived in was mortgaged to the hilt, an asset to be seized. Her credit cards, the source of her validation, were declined. The friends who had fawned over her at the gala now crossed the street to avoid her. Her entire identity, meticulously constructed on a foundation of lies and a desperate hunger for status, had been demolished in a single evening. She was left with nothing. No money, no status, no public adoration. Just a ruined husband whose entire life was a testament to the sins of his mother. That was her prison, a life sentence of irrelevance. In the weeks that followed, my house transformed. It became a quiet, orderly crime scene. Teams of curators from the Louvre, the Prado, the Met arrived alongside stoic, tight-lipped FBI agents. They moved with a hushed reverence, their white-gloved hands treating every object with the care it deserved. The attic, once a dusty tomb of secrets, was now brightly lit, catalogued, and slowly, piece by piece, emptied. I would sit in the living room listening to the careful footsteps on the floorboards above me. I watched as they carried the crates down the stairs. Each one that passed through my front door was an act of exorcism, a Monet shimmering with light and water sealed away to return to Paris, a small, intense Vermeer destined for The Hague, a bold, sorrowful Kollwitz heading back to Berlin. With each departure, I felt a weight lifting from the very bones of the house, from the deepest corners of my soul. The air grew thinner, cleaner. The oppressive weight that had defined my home for 50 years was dissipating like smoke. Finally, the day came when the last crate was loaded onto a climate-controlled truck. The last agent shook my hand, gave me a respectful nod, and closed the door behind him. And then there was silence. But it was a different silence. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of Richard's disapproval or the lonely silence of my grief. This was a clean silence, a light silence. It was the sound of space, of emptiness waiting to be filled. I walked through the house from room to room, touching the walls. It was just a house now, my house. I went to the window in the living room, the one that looked out onto the overgrown garden, and I pushed it open. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the breeze that drifted in felt like a promise, not a threat. It smelled of damp earth and the distant sea, and it was the scent of my own unwritten future. Months have passed. The hydrangeas are blooming now, great heavy heads of blue and purple. I didn't sell the house. The thought of it, once a terrifying threat, now seems absurd. Where would I go? This house, cleansed of its sins, is the only place I want to be. I hired a young, enthusiastic landscape architect, and together we are reclaiming the garden from the weeds that Richard had allowed to choke it. Taming the wildness is my project. My hands, once soft and idle, are now calloused from pulling ivy and planting roses. I find a profound satisfaction in it, in nurturing life where there was once only neglect. The money from the foundation is an abstract concept, a series of numbers on a statement that Jessica manages. It's a tool, nothing more, a means to an end. It allows me to restore the garden, to pay my bills, to live without the cold knot of financial fear that Richard had so carefully cultivated in me. My real wealth is not in a bank account. It's in the quiet of the morning, holding a warm cup of coffee and watching the sun rise over my garden. It's the freedom to read a book all afternoon without interruption. It's the absolute, unshakable right to exist in my own home, on my own terms, without fear. But freedom has a price. I did not escape the inferno unscathed. I lost my daughter. And that is a grief far sharper, far more persistent than the hollow ache I felt for my husband. The loss of Richard was the shedding of a skin. The loss of Chloe is an amputation. Some nights it's a phantom limb, a sharp, sudden ache for something that was once a part of me and can never be again. I see a mother and daughter laughing in the grocery store, and I have to turn away a lump forming in my throat. I won the war, but the casualty I mourn the most was my own child. I tell myself it was a mercy, killing, freeing her from a life built on a lie. But in the dark, I know I am the one who pulled the trigger. Leo visits often. He's starting at Reed in the fall, studying computer science and art history, a combination that makes me smile. He sits with me on the newly repaired porch, the scent of fresh cut cedar still sharp in the air. We don't talk much about what happened. We don't have to. Instead, we watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. He shows me the Foundation's website on his tablet. It's filled with messages of support from all over the world: curators, students, art lovers, people who have been inspired by the story of the woman who took a wrecking ball to her own life in order to find the truth. One comment catches my eye. It's from a young woman in Spain. "Thank you," it reads. "You gave us our Goya back. But you also gave us a story about the strength it takes to speak, even when your voice has been silenced for decades. I won. I have my home. I have my peace. I have my self-respect. But victory is a complicated, messy thing. My name, Eleanor Grayson, will forever be tied to scandal and crime. I sleep in a house cleansed of stolen art, but it is haunted by a different kind of ghost. The ghost of the family I had to destroy to save myself. And every night I have to find a way to live with that. The secrets we keep, and the secrets that are kept from us, they have a weight. They can fill a house, an attic, a lifetime. What secrets are living in your walls? And what would you do to finally let in the light? Let me know in the comments below.